So this is the position for today. Am I audible clearly? Just put a thumbs up. Okay. So it's black to move, and let's start with it. It's black to move, and we have one pawn extra today. This C pawn is extra, and let me briefly explain the position. H3, H3, G2, F3, E4, and C2. King is on F2, and black has H6, G7, F7, E6, knight on D6, along with king on F8. So this is the basic outline of the position, and we are up by a knight, but opponent has one extra pawn. So let's see how to accomplish the win easily. Here it's black to move. What are the moves that you are suggesting? There are three possible moves according to me: King E7, Knight anywhere to C4 or B5, or even to B7. So four types of moves. Which moves are you suggesting? Please put it in the chat. Hello. Please put it in the chat. NB5. Okay. It looks like the best move. And any other? Should we king? Should Can we move the king up? Okay. So let's continue. Here there are two alternatives. Either to go knight b5, and knight b5 aims to go for knight d4 or knight a3, attacking this c2 pawn. And if white tries to play c4, we can just push the knight to c7. And if the king moves up, again the process of moving up the king starts here. King d4, king d6, let's say c4 check, and then king c6, followed by king e4, and then knight a6 wins this c5 c pawn. Okay, because number of attackers is 2 and number of defender is 1. King and knight are attacking this pawn. Only king is there to defend this. Hence, it's an easy win for black. So what about e5 here? It's another move. King has to go. Sorry, king here has to go to c6, so that it could keep a indirect control on the c5. Direct control on the c5, and the knight may also maneuver freely by going to a6 c5, or even a8 b6, and then a4 directly. This is the main idea. So knight b5 is good, and we can also play king e7 here with the same idea of king e3, and then we may go for something like knight b5 c4, mm, knight to c7 maybe. Yes, knight to c7, king d4, king d6, c5 is not possible as we saw, and e5 check. King c6 is a very simple move, and you can just play knight a6, knight c5, knight d7. This f4 comes in anytime. Just try to liquidate the white's position, and try to force him to play the king at the very end. Let me show you how. For example, let's say white continues with f4. Okay, so knight a6, and then maybe g4, and knight to c5, h4, and g6. Why g6? Because you are restricting the f5 push here. Okay, because if let's say white goes f5, you can take this using the g pawn or even the e pawn. Both are good moves. And then after that, I prefer e takes f5 here, because let let me tell you why. When g takes f5, g takes f5, black is kind of a pawn. Why not g takes f5? Because it allows a nasty trick g5 here. It can be tricky, but f7 pawn is there, so there is nothing to worry. You can just take it, but then white can trick you with playing h5. Okay, that's the main reason. Let's see if we can stop this pawn or not. Or you can just push g4 here, h6, g3, and maybe king e3, and this pawn kind of does not get stopped here. That's the main reason. And if we play f4 check, then king f3 comes, and it should be knight d3, h7, knight takes e3 check, king to uh, g2, and then knight g6 stops this h pawn. Let me reiterate it again. After f5, white is trying to break open the center. White is trying to break open your center, and he tries to see if you are falling for a pawn, for a trap here. So I suggest e takes f5 because it is the best move, and it completely nullifies all the tactics that white is hoping to put. What happens if you go for g takes f5? It's a bit tricky proposition because white is not obliged to take this pawn. If I am white, I will play g5 here. Why g5? Because I am trying to create a pass pawn. Okay, so it's forced for black to take this h pawn, take using his h pawn the g pawn. Why? Because let's say we play a random move here, knight e4, then this pawn becomes a monster, and it will go on to queen as well. Okay, that's why we have to take this once, and now white will not take this, else he will lose because he is saying that he is being stopped by the f7 pawn. What he will do is he will play h5 here. Okay, what does h5 achieve? It goes three squares, 1, 2, and 3 for a promotion. Now, please look at this carefully. This pawn on the next move has two squares. Okay, and knight can stop it by going to e4 and then to g5. But it requires three moves to stop it. So what can we do? We can also push our pawn with g4, then h6, g3. Now white tries to play something smart because he's seeing that after h7 and g2 this pawn becomes unstoppable, and we will promote with a check too. For example, g8 h8 equals to queen, and f g1 equals to queen, and this is a check. Notice that. So white tries to be a bit inventive, and he plays king e3 here. Okay, now f4 check is one alternative, and here we go king f3. Okay, Acha. Now here I have to tell an important concept, that is connected pawns protect themselves. For example, if white push, it's white to move and he played king f3. Now what will black move is he wants to stop this h7 from queening. One point. Second point is he also wants to uh, kind of set some trap for white here. So what he does is he thinks all of his options that how to stop this. Then he observes that this pawn on e5 is a loose target, and e5 and f3. f3 king on f3 will get a check if he goes knight to d3. Okay. So here he plays knight d3, but that's not the main thing. After h7, for example, black moves knight d3, and then you go h7. The point is it's white to queen on the next move. Okay, so what does black do is he takes with a check. Okay, and he's not worried about king takes f4 now because he will go knight g6 check here. Okay, and he has to take this pawn, Now we have stopped this pawn from queening, and hence we can accomplish our target of winning. Let's go. Let's say king c5, king g4, and king takes c4, king g5, and then king d5 comes, king f6, and finally here we can go. It's a bit of a topsy-turvy position, and we can go something like e5 here. Then king takes f7, uh, followed by knight h8, king g8, e4, king takes e3, and then both of them queens simultaneously, and it's a draw. Okay, white gets the first check, will go here, and it's a table based draw. So what I'm trying to say is, if you play e takes f5, that's the best move, because it does not allow all these sorts of threats here. If you play g takes f5, maybe computer can defend this, but you have this g5 idea here. You can also play h5, completely blocking the king side as well. So this is one of the tricky ideas that white can play and you may fall into. Please keep this in mind. And if we go for h takes g5, then also it's going h5, and nd7 is one threat. King, then h6 and f8 protects the pawn. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So let's proceed. Now here we have played king e7, knight b5, c4, knight c7, and c5 check has been coming. And c5 check is as I said, it's a wrong move. King c6. Now white can also not play king a5 here because he has no way to come into the position. So there is nothing to discuss about c5. What if white decides to play f4 here? Then you have the concept of controlling the squares, that is f6. What is the concept of controlling? You have f4 controlling here on e5. Remember that the pawns capture diagonally on both sides. So this f pawn controls this e5 and g5. Control means the ability to capture. What you can do is you can play f6 here to increase the control on e5 on the side of black pawn. And then he may go e5 again, and it's more or less the same position that we saw. Now white doesn't have the ability to play pawn breaks here, and it's much simpler to win as white. So as black, king c5, king d3, and now our task is very simplified. We have to attack the c4 pawn and win it. Can you suggest a knight maneuver here? Two move knight maneuver. Can you suggest a two move knight maneuver here? Please write it in the chat. Two move maneuver. What will be the next two moves that black will play with the knight in order to take the c4 pawn? A5 c4. No, knight is on c7. It can go to a6 and then to b4. No, I am asking for only two moves. Two moves which will net the c4 pawn. Think like this, that you have to attack the c4 pawn. Now you are having this knight on c7. How to attack the c4? That, I mean, just imagine that you have the knight. Where will you place this knight in order to directly attack the c4? Now there are four squares which I am seeing. Okay, b6, a5, a3, b2. If I place the knight on any of these squares, on the next move I will be able to capture this pawn, because there is no protection available on its side. Okay, so the move which I am thinking is, yes, you are correct. It's knight a8. It seems weird to play the knight on the rim, that is the corner, but it has a purpose. It directly reaches b6 here and then takes this pawn. Okay. Other moves like knight to a6 and then to b4 and then to c6 and then to a5, it's very time consuming. When you have a direct route to reach b6, you can just apply this, and any move by king, knight b6, and you are getting this pawn. After that, winning the game as well. I will show you the complete win. g3, knight takes c4, g4, knight takes e5. Or let's play a bit more competitively. King d3 takes king e4. Let me delete this. A bit more competitive. Okay. Knight is after knight a8. Let's say he moves king c3, knight b6, king d3 takes king e4, and we can here play either h5 or g5, or any other move is also possible. I mean, any knight, I do not prefer to move the knight here because it's targeting the e5, and king has to move at some point, and when the king moves, we will move our king to d5. That's the major motto. And then as we move to d5, this e5 pawn also gets lost from the board. So we have in illustration, let's say h5, and then after g4 takes h takes, and you can play g5, completely blockading the position. King only has two moves here, f3 or d3. If he goes f3, then you can either play knight takes e5, being a check, or you can play king d5. The pawn is not going anywhere. Solidify the king's position and finish the game faster. King here to g3, king takes e5, king f3, and king d4, king e2, knight e3, king f3, e5, king g3, king e4, king f2, and then king f4. And then after that, knight takes g4, e4. This will be covered in the pawn endgames regarding how to make promotions and how to consider oppositions. So in many games, you will not have this extra luxury of knight. So in that position, what is the technique we will look at later stage. And king e2. After that, e3, king f1, king f3, king to even e2. Now king d2 is the only move. King f2, protecting this pawn and allowing it to queen on the next move. Queen, queen d2. I hope you know the rule of queen checkmate now. So just let's apply it. Queen c3, knight position. We are coincidentally studying the knight endgame today. So it's a knight position. King a4, queen b2, king a5, and this. And let me show you something new today. Knight e5, king, knight to c6, queen b8. It is a checkmate. I hope you understood it. How we systematically break down the game using knight, using the king. We get one pawn, then two pawns, and then obviously the third and fourth pawn gets exchanged, and we are left with one or two pawns more on our position. Ultimately, we are making the queen and checkmating it, either with the help of knight or with the help of king. So let me go back to the position here. Knight b5 or king to e7. Both are equally good. You can also play knight to b7, but I would suggest that instead of playing this knight anywhere except b5, just go for the king e7 maneuver as well. Another move which can be considered is e5. What it does is it blocks the movement of f4, and then it also not allows the black king to come to d4 square. As we discuss about control, this is a major fixation point, and also knight can move to d5, b5, and then to d4, effectively controlling the entire center. Okay, let's see how the game proceeds. King e3, king e7, king d3, king to d7. Why not king to e6? Because king has no scope going to any of these three squares. This is blocked by the knight, and we are not giving him much time to go into the position with the king. So we are playing king d7 here. Then he has to go king c3, king c6, king b4, and now you can just play any move like g6. These are all waiting moves, so don't need to worry about it too much. Fight takes. Okay. So here, best move or a very decent move is f5, which allows pawn takes, and now you don't have g5 here. Remember, because the h pawn is not on h4 here, so he has to play, and then knight takes f5. This is also playable position, and as we see in e5, our play got much better, and much simpler as well. That's what we need when we are playing in a 30-second environment where we have only 3 plus 2 as the time control. We have spent entire opening and middle game analyzing and bringing the position to a point where we have an extra knight. But the point is, we only have 30 seconds on our clock. So we are playing e5 here instead of neither moving the knight nor moving the king. This is third option, and it's also a very good option because it restricts the movement of white pieces easily, and then again the king can go to e7, d7, c6, and the knight can maneuver to f5, sorry, b5, and then either you can play in the queen side or you can go g6 followed by f5. Okay, to break open the king side, ultimately giving the win to the knight. I've shown this line to you, just revisit it again. And after that, the knight aims to go for d4, forking both f3 and c2. So let's say he goes king c3, then you have king d5. Always move the king upwards whenever you have the opportunity to do so. King d3, and now knight d4. King cannot protect both of them. Either of them have to drop back. So white plays a tricky move c4 here, king c5, and white moves king e4 here, hoping to take your pawn. Don't be too jealous to take this pawn, because it is very very important to not give up this as well. I mean, you can also take, but the problem is you are allowing the king to come to somewhere like e5, and then to f6, and then potentially to g6, taking a last pawn. It will be a draw. Okay, let me show you the peril here of taking king takes c4. What happens is you will play king takes f5, then knight f3, and the point is you cannot stop g6 here. Knight h4 is possible, king g4, and here either you have to make the knight go to g2, where he will come to h5. For example, knight g2, king f5. There is no way to stop white from taking this h6 pawn. That's why we should not be jealous at this point, and we should not be greedy as well as jealous of white's counterplay. We have to play king d6 to defend this pawn. Now he might entice you with c5 here. You can go king e6 quite safely, and after that he also has another tricky move f4 here. Okay, so here you can play knight to c6, pawn takes, knight takes. If you notice this position carefully, now white only has limited space to go to h6 pawn, and it cannot reach easily as well, because king f4 followed by g3, followed by h4, and then h5. It will take like four moves: one, two, three, and four. Because g4 is controlled by knight, and f5 is controlled by king, and it's important to defend this h pawn as well. Otherwise, we cannot make the queen. Let's move further with this. Example, king f4. There and here in this position, we can play king f6. Why king f6? Because c6 is protected by the knight. So anytime c6 is not easily possible, and we are restricting the flow of the game by playing by pushing white to the corner of the board as much as possible. So king g5, h4 check, king f5, and now this h4 pawn is going to be captured very soon, and h6 pawn is very crucial to make the queen here. Okay, so king f3, king h3, and then king f4, then this, and now don't take this pawn, take knight d3 check, and take this c5 pawn, so that the threat of uh, pass pawn moving down the board vanishes once and for all. King e3, knight takes c5, king d4, knight e6 check, king e3, and now book king g3. Because there is a rule, we will look at it in the rook pawn session, which will come soon in 3 to 4 days, where you need to place the king in f1, f2, g1, g2, and h1, h2. These six squares are crucial for the defending side. If their king reaches anywhere in these six squares, I mean, this is applicable for every corner and every color. So there is no discrimination on that part, or no rule change on that part. If your defending king reaches any of these six squares, then there are high possibilities, or there is a sure shot possibility that the game would end in a draw, because black stalemates himself in that position. So here king e2, white is trying to somehow come to f1 here. We deny this, and he plays king e3. Now what we can do is we can again play king g3 to gain time, and after king e2, maybe we can go knight f4 check. We are allowing this temporarily, but he will be pushed away very soon. King takes f5, king takes h4, king f2, king g4. Now white's task is cut out. He has to just go for g1, h5, h1, h4. Now here comes the most important part. You have to go to you have to somehow land the king on f2 or f3, and then this knight on g3 to avoid to prevent this white king from going to h1. Okay, also you can go king h3 here to implement the same plan. Knight h5, king g1, and if you go knight g3 now, notice that this h1 is completely blocked, and f1 is also not there, f2, and then you come king h2. Here white has to go away, and then you can capture this king g1, and this is a red carpet for black's h4 pawn for becoming the queen. Let me finish the game fully. h3, and at this point you should not think. When the red carpet has arrived, don't think, just pre-move everything. Okay, so point is you have to just make the queen. Here white can try to play king f3, and if you have pre-moved to queen, no issues, he can just take it. You play queen e4, e4, king h3, and king f2, king h2, and it's a queen h4 checkmate. Queen endgames, just follow the knight pattern and you will be able to checkmate your opponent very easily, provided you are under a time stress. This line is bit lengthy because we have covered e5, but we have covered in depth. I mean, your opponent might not play this over the board in such a short span of time. But if your opponent is strong enough, like an 1800 or 1900 player on chess.com or leeches, whatever platform you are playing, if your opponent is strong enough, he may find this idea as well. And at that time, you should be able to come up with the solution fast. I mean, all these moves should be considered in a maximum of 2 or 3 seconds, provided you are having increment. Otherwise, you need to play a bit more faster as well. So I hope you understood entirely every line I have covered. We have covered knight b5, king to e7, and pawn push to e5. Three lines, three major lines, and all of them would lead to a quick victory. Okay. Any questions? Before getting near the pawn, we can play the knight to g5, which we can kill the pawn. At which position are you referring? Here, here we cannot go to g5 because it drops the knight, and if you do not know the king pawn ending thoroughly, then you might lose this as well. For example, knight g5, as you are saying, is a practical notion, but if he goes king e2, then what's the point of going for knight g5 and then taking and king f1? You have king h2 here, king f2 g4, king f1 g3, king f2, king f2 is not there, king e2, g2, king f2, and queen. This is winning, but this will be only winning if you know the king pawn ending very well. When the pawn was on h3, here you are saying, here you are saying pawn, actually this knight is trying to protect the pawn on c6 from advancing. That's why we are using the king to come into the king side, to infiltrate the king side, and keeping a watch on this c5 pawn so that it may not run away. Because if we make, I mean, in time constraints, I'm talking about all these things in time constraint. Not, it is not meant for a long format game, because in long format game you have a lot of time and you will be able to think about every iteration. But since we all here play only blitz chess, so in blitz chess it's a safe concept to keep this knight from preventing c6 pawn, pawn advance, and using our king to destroy the king side of white. That's the only notion. Okay. Any other questions, or else we can just conclude today's meet? And next up tomorrow we will have knight versus two pawns. It will be a bit tricky, and knight versus two pawns will be, I think, generally easier than bishop versus two pawns. And thereafter, knight versus three pawns will have two subsections, because knight is a short range piece, so it is always difficult to defend it versus three pawns. But there are some situations where it is possible to even win the game. We will discuss it in the upcoming sessions. And I will schedule the tournament, but if there is huge rush regarding Olympiad chess, then I can't help it, because the point is server control is not in my hands, and leeches has to respond for that. So I will try to launch the tournament as soon as possible, but I'm not sure whether it will run or not. In chess.com, actually, it requires some modifications on part of thematic tournament, and chess.com generally doesn't support thematic tournament on members side. It can be done through organizers side, but a normal member cannot create a thematic tournament. That's why I am preferring to go for leeches, because leeches gives these all practical tools very efficiently. But I will try, if there is any option available on chess.com, I will try to explore. But so far, There is no option of conducting thematic arena that I but I cannot assure you whether it will be conducted or not. I will try, unless or until I intimate. You can just assume that it would be leeches for now. So let's end the meet now. Thank you for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.